They say peace comes with time. 38 years taught me that. Routine, trust, noise you don't even hear anymore. Coffee drip, HVAC hum, the sound of a marriage holding. Until one photo told me everything was louder than I thought. She said Arizona, church retreat, but the elevator timestamp said Vegas. And the man at her side? Dr. Wells, our family doctor, my friend, the one who raised his glass at our anniversary toast. Now the countdown begins. 7 days till Christmas, a house full of grandkids, and one choice: keep the peace or light the fuse. I chose quiet war. First, freeze the frame. Then, match timestamps, call logs, receipts. I drink hot cocoa at the fireplace, while divorce papers sit warm under my palm. On Christmas night, with the roast still hot and the room glowing soft, I hand her the gold envelope. If she opens it, the truth breaks everything. If she doesn't, it already has. If you've ever faced a truth you couldn't unsee, share your story below. And subscribe, because the hardest part is just beginning. Here's the truth no one tells you about long marriages. Peace has a rhythm. Mine lived in small Texas habits, her coffee starting before sunrise, my boots by the back door, the same pew each Sunday. The house knew our timing so well the HVAC sounded like a lullaby. After decades, routine became a kind of prayer you said without thinking. I listened to that prayer while I fixed a loose hinge, fed the dog, checked the porch light. The years taught me to trust the ordinary. Then a whisper crept in, barely there, almost kind, something off by half a beat. Not thunder, just a clock tick landing a hair late. I told myself the holidays make everything louder. Grandkids on the way, lights to hang, a grocery list that breeds overnight. But the whisper stayed. It floated above the garland, over the sink, through the hall. If the music of a home shifts by one note, do you wait it out or listen closer? It started as a small change in the soundtrack. Nora kept her phone closer. Not barricaded, just near, on the counter while she stirred batter, face down but not far. A message would land, and she'd smile the way folks do at a sweet memory. I told myself teachers swap jokes this time of year, choir groups share carols, friends pass around recipes that never work. In the grocery aisle, I reached for cinnamon and watched her type with that quick, careful touch that once sent notes to me. At church, we slid into our groove, same pew, same hymn, and the phone hummed once in her purse like a trapped bee. She pressed my hand with the old warmth. After the service, neighbors talked about traveling, about football, about a cold snap rolling in. On the drive home, the sun fell behind the pines, and the dashboard lights came alive. The house waited for us, steady as always, but the melody felt a shade different. She said there was an educator's retreat in Arizona. We loaded the suitcase before dawn, the kind of dark that belongs to truckers and nurses. The airport road was near empty, Christmas lights still glowing in gas station windows. At the drop-off lane, Nora smoothed my collar like she had since our first gray hair. "Be good while I'm gone," she said, the words light as breath in cold air. I promised to pick her up Thursday, same as always. We laughed about how the house would look by then, stockings hung, tools put away, hunting gear lined up for when the kids rolled in. She walked toward the sliding doors. I watched until the crowd swallowed her figure and the glass settled back into its reflection. On the drive home, classic country played low. The sun rose slow, gold on the hood, steady as habit. I set the timer on the tree, fixed a bulb that flickered, and let the day move in its usual order. That first night carried the kind of quiet you get only after years together, familiar, soft, trustworthy. The tree cast warm shapes on the wall. The heater breathed. I laid out stockings, checked batteries in the grandkids' toys, taped the last of the wrapping paper, and set a mug near the fireplace. The house should have felt fuller, not thinner. Yet the silence stretched just beyond comfort, like a shirt that doesn't fit the same after it's washed. The phone on the mantel stayed asleep. I told myself teachers get busy at conferences, hotel schedules run late, time zones play tricks. I stirred the cocoa, listened for the small sounds I know by heart, the ice maker, the settling beams, the wind combing the pines. Somewhere under it, a new note pressed up, gentle, insistent. I stood there with the lights blinking red and gold and asked the question grown folks ask when they feel a seam pull. Is this a loose thread or the first tear? 3 evenings later, I was in the garage sorting hunting gear when Brady, buddy from work, texted from Las Vegas. He was at a bull riding event, the kind that fills an arena with dust and hope. "You won't believe who I saw," he wrote, and a photo followed. It took a breath to understand the frame. Nora stood in a red dress I hadn't seen before, a drink in her hand, her smile turned toward the man beside her. Dr. Wells, our family doctor, the friend who raised his glass at our anniversary and told the room he admired the way we loved. The image wasn't perfect, grainy, the way hotel security footage always is, but the timestamp was clear, and the elevator panel said enough. In the window of the garage, Christmas lights from the living room washed the concrete in red and green. I held the phone until my palm warmed. The heater kicked on. The dog shifted. Somewhere deep inside, the floor of my life leaned an inch. Silence isn't surrender, it's a tool. That night, I stood in the doorway and looked at the tree the grandkids love, the stockings with their names in crooked glitter, the little felt reindeer my daughter made in 3rd grade. A blow-up fight would have scorched all of it. I pictured small hands opening presents while adults whisper in the kitchen, and I knew the cost of a wrong move. So I set the coffee to auto brew, stacked the wrapping paper in reach, and chose a different road. Let the season stay intact while I gather the truth one clean piece at a time. In long marriages, you learn timing matters more than volume. I checked the porch light, fed the dog, and folded the throw on the couch the way she likes it. Then I found an empty legal pad and wrote a single line at the top. What I know, not what I feel. Peace could wait. Evidence couldn't. When the world tilts, you go where it once stood straight. For me, that's the Pine Ridge camp. 2 hours of 2-lane road, fence posts ticking by like metronome marks. The cabin smells like cedar and years of rain. I built a small fire and let the flames do what they do best, make a man tell himself the truth. I laid out a simple list, timestamp, location, source, then read it out loud to see what held. The night pressed close, a steady hush, the kind that makes your ears work harder. I remembered my father teaching me to sight a rifle. Exhale slow, let the wobble settle. Accept that your hands will never be stone. The phone buzzed once on the table and went still. I stared at the stars, felt the cold bite through my jacket, and realized quiet can be a kind of armor. If I wear it right, will it protect the family or just hide the wound? By morning, the list had edges. I drove back into town and sat in my truck outside Graham Whitaker's office, a brick building wedged between the barber and a feed store. Inside, the coffee was strong and the advice was stronger. Graham speaks the language of consequences, what holds up, what falls apart, what to put in writing. I told him exactly what I had and exactly what I didn't, and he asked for dates, times, screenshots, and patience. He talked about keeping my voice level, about how judges hear stories differently when holidays and children are involved, about not touching a thing on her phone without a clean paper trail. I've known men who tried to outrun the law with sheer anger. They always tripped on their own laces. Graham slid a notepad across the desk and circled 3 words: documentation, discretion, timing. I signed a retainer, pocketed a pen, and felt the ground steady under my boots. Graham made a call, and by dusk I was in a narrow office above an antique store, the kind of place where the floorboards remember every step. Sloane Carter didn't waste pleasantries. She asked for device types, carriers, email aliases, travel habits, and who in our circle would notice a change in routine. Her eyes stayed on the facts. Her notepad looked like a compass. We agreed on a lane: mirror what's legal, double-check what's public, never touch what isn't. She said the line you cross in anger is the line that costs you later. I thought about church, about the ring on my hand, about a promise that still weighed what it weighed even if it cracked. Sloane packed her folder, set a clear update window, and told me what to expect first: call logs, then billing trails, then movement patterns. The sun dropped behind the courthouse dome as we shook hands. When the truth arrives, do I open the door? The next morning, I gathered what a lifetime produces: carrier bills in a desk drawer, bank statements in a shoebox, travel emails printed without thinking, the ordinary clutter that turns into a map. I placed them in neat stacks and signed the authorizations Sloan needed. Right names, right dates, right boundaries. A signature is a quiet oath. It says, "I will stand by what these pages say." I remembered the first contract I ever signed for our house, the way the pen felt heavier because the future sat in the ink. This felt like that in reverse, not building, but protecting what's left standing. I labeled envelopes, made copies, and tucked one set into the fire safe. Then I slid the gold stationery into my briefcase, the same color I'd use later when it mattered. I straightened the photos on the mantel, touched the frame of our last family picture, and let the room settle around me. When the proof lands, do I lay it gently or let it hit like a hammer? Midnight has a way of telling the truth. Sloan's first report hit my inbox after the house went still. Call logs laid out like fence posts on a long road. Nora and Dr. Adrian Wells, late night to late night, short bursts and long stretches, stacked tight across weeks I could name by memory. Birthdays, a church fundraiser, the night I fixed the leaky sink. I printed the sheet and took a pen to it the way a mechanic listens to a stubborn engine. Circle, note, test the rhythm. Tuesday bled into Wednesday right where she claimed seminars ran long. Sunday evenings hummed after we got home from service, when we normally split leftovers and watched the weather. A marriage keeps time. These calls kept a different beat. I drew a timeline on yellow paper, her flights, my errands, the grandkids' school shows, and the lines refused to meet. That's the thing about patterns. Once you see them, you can't unsee them, and the clock won't go back to quiet. The next packet was short and sharp, message excerpts legal to view, cleaned of clutter, dated and stamped. At first, the words were routine, appointment reminders, check-ins the way professionals stay polite. Then the temperature shifted. Miss your voice. Wish I could fall asleep next to you. Next time, longer. Simple sentences, no poetry, like two people building a room out of air and pretending it had doors. I read them at the kitchen table where we used to sort coupons, and the chair felt smaller than it had in years. I remembered a night we both laughed over a burnt pie, how easy mercy felt when the stakes were flour and sugar. This was different. I kept my breathing even, counted to 5, set the pages down, and let my hand rest on the wood until the sting passed. Mercy still had a place in my life. Did it have a place here? Or was this where mercy makes a man small? Paper doesn't lie when you stack it right. I lined up Nora's Arizona itinerary beside credit card activity and hotel billing. One column spoke of conference rooms and name badges, the other knew the smell of casino carpets. Belmore Grand charges landed with the quiet certainty of gravity. Room, dining, 2-person breakfast, a spa add-on that matched a timestamp from those late calls. I cross-checked flight numbers and saw the trick. A connection that could pass for Phoenix if you didn't look at the destination gate. Travel apps love to auto-sort. My eyes did the sorting that mattered. I marked each match with a small star, the way a coach grades film, not to punish, but to understand the play. On the counter sat a bowl of oranges we keep for the little ones, and I peeled one just to feel something clean. The peel came off in one piece. Some things come apart easy, some require a steady hand and time. Back home, I returned to the role I knew by heart. I asked about her sessions, nodded at stories about keynote speakers, reached for plates while the roast cooled. Routine is a porch light. You turn it on and hope it keeps what you love inside the circle. I listened for the tiny slips, names out of order, pauses where none used to be, a smile that didn't quite reach. She hummed while she wrapped gifts, the same tune she used when the kids were small, and for a moment I was back in a rented duplex with a wobbly table and a secondhand tree. The dog curled at her feet. I checked batteries, tied ribbons, and made sure the gold envelope stayed flat under a stack of catalogs. Watching isn't the same as accusing. It's measuring a gap and deciding if the bridge will hold one more crossing. If it doesn't, who do you keep on your side, and who do you let go? By week's end, the file was heavy enough to bend a binder clip. Calls, texts, billing trails, a travel path that spelled VEGAS with no room for doubt. I placed everything in order the way you'd set out tools before fixing a fence. What you need, what you might need, what you leave alone. The fireplace threw a clean warmth across the room, and carols drifted from the radio like they do every year whether a family is steady or not. I thought about the men I know who charged in loud and paid for it later, and the few who waited, set the table, and let truth speak in full light. This is where I ask you, the ones who've lived enough holidays to know how fragile they are, what would you do? A. Confront now and break the season to save yourself. B. Finish the list, hold the line, and open the envelope when every chair is filled. Which cost do you carry? Here's how the season performs when it has to. Nora pulls the tubs from the attic, hums along with the radio, and turns the house into a postcard. Cinnamon on the stovetop, ribbons in neat curls. She laughs at a burnt batch of fudge and flips the tray like a pro who's done this 100 times. I move through the rooms with a different job. Build a timeline strong enough to stand on. Notes in my pocket. Dates in the margins. I match her decorations with my markers. Garland goes up as I draw a line from call to call. Stockings hang while I anchor a receipt to a time. When she asks if the lights look even, I step back, tilt my head, and say, they're perfect. The truth is, the room is flawless. And that's the tell. Masks fit best when you've practiced the role for years. If the set looks this good, how long has the play been running? The phone buzzed once on the counter, Sloane's name glowing like a small lighthouse. I opened the update and saw what every husband prays won't exist. Elevator footage, time-stamped, steady as a metronome. Belmore Grand, red dress. Dr. Wells leaning in, the shape of two people who no longer share our gravity. I closed the screen and let my face return to neutral. In long lives, control is a skill you sharpen the way you sharpen a pocket knife. Slow, patient, careful not to slip. Nora asked if the roast needed basting. I checked the oven like that was the only heat in the room. She brushed my shoulder on her way to the pantry, and all I allowed myself was a breath and a nod. I set the phone under a folded dish towel and lifted the pot lid. Steam rose, honest and unforgiving. The proof had arrived. Do I kill the scene now, or let the curtain fall on its own? I called the kids that afternoon with the voice fathers use when weather turns. Calm, practical, steering everyone home. We settled the menu, assigned pies, and laughed about the year the dog stole the ham. I asked about school concerts, winter colds, the new bike one grandson swears he can assemble without help. They heard what I needed them to hear. Tradition is safe, Grandpa's got it covered, the house will smell like cedar and butter. After we hung up, I sat with a mug I didn't drink and wrote 2 lists. What this family deserves tonight, what this family can endure tomorrow. I've seen holidays cracked by words said in the wrong hour. I've also seen silence rot a room from the inside. The goal was simple. Keep small hands opening gifts without flinching at adult shadows. I checked batteries again, turned the tree a 1/4 inch, and tested the dimmer switch. The table could hold the weight if I placed it right. That evening, the soundtrack layered itself without my help. Wrapping paper whispered across the dining room, tape clicked sharp, and the oven chimed with that friendly bell every recipe trusts. Underneath, a colder rhythm kept time. The soft ping of Sloane's follow-ups, the faint vibration of a billing match, the tick of a wall clock I've ignored for years. I let the sounds braid until the room had 2 truths at once. One you can show the little ones, one you put in a folder. Nora sang along to an old carol while tying a bow, and I heard the same note she used when our daughters were small and believed ribbons could fix anything. I lined up envelopes on the hall table, cards for neighbors, cash for the delivery driver, the gold one that didn't belong. When she asked about the playlist, I told her it was fine. The mix was right. The mix was honest. 2 keys, 1 house, both playing through. Some decisions you stage like a careful rescue. I waited for the calendar to do its work. Eve, morning, dinner, dishes, so the joy that belonged to others could land where it should. Then I set my plan in the smallest details. The gold envelope pressed flat in a cookbook, a chair pulled back for her mother, a clean plate shining at the head of the table. I rehearsed the sequence the way a man rehearses a handshake. Walk, place, step away. Not dramatic, not cruel, precise. I pictured the room in the soft light after dessert, the children slipping toward board games, the elders trading stories, the air warm and forgiving. And in that pocket of quiet, I would hand her the envelope that carried the season's true weight. Not a performance, an accounting. Not a threat, a mirror. When the moment arrives, do I open a future where trust is gone, but truth stands, or leave the lie intact one more night and let it own us all? Every story gets a day it puts on boots and knocks. Mine arrived as a tidy email from Sloan, a consolidated file, messages, bookings, footage, stacked like lumber ready for framing. I printed it at the office because paper steadies a man. On top sat the elevator still from the Belmore Grand. Under it, a grid of call durations that formed a heartbeat not mine. Then the bookings, room charges, 2 breakfasts, a spa add-on I could date by muscle memory. The message excerpts were brief and warm, the way a hand stays on a shoulder a bit too long. Sloane's cover note stayed professional. Sequence confirmed, cross-checks complete. I set each page in order on my desk, left to right, like you lay out tools before fixing a fence. A home stands because small things line up straight, so does a case. I drew breath through my nose, slow and even, and felt the old lesson return. Simple doesn't mean easy, clear doesn't mean kind. I took the file outside to the truck, where a man can think without walls listening. December light hits different on a dashboard, clean, unforgiving. I read the pages once, then once more. No yelling, no tears. The body has ways to keep you upright when the ground shifts an inch. I rested the folder on the steering wheel and watched my breath fog the glass. A country station mumbled something about second chances, and I reached over to turn it down. My hands looked older than I remember, lined by every fence I've mended and bill I've paid. People think a blow lands like a thunderclap. Sometimes it's a frost that settles on you slow and won't shake loose. A pickup rolled by with a tree tied to the roof, a dad grinning in the cold. I pictured my table, my people, the roast planned, the grace we always say. With this truth sitting warm in my lap, what grace do I offer? And to whom? Memory has a mean sense of humor. As I flipped the file closed, my mind went to last spring, that restaurant with the long porch and the way the light fell across our plates. Dr. Adrian Wells stood and said kind things about enduring love, clinking his glass while folks smiled and nodded. He had the timing of a man who's practiced praise. We laughed when the waiter brought the wrong dessert, and Nora fed me a bite like we were still learning how to be a pair. Back then, the words felt earned. Now they ring with a hollow I can't patch. I know speeches. I've given a few at graduations and retirements. You hold a room by telling the truth that everyone already feels. He told a truth I wanted to feel. I placed the folder on the seat beside me and let the engine idle. Spring said one thing, winter says another. Which season is honest, the one that warmed us, or this one that burns? I drove home and spread photos on the dining table the way we used to lay out school projects with the kids. Year by year, a life appeared. The first tiny apartment with a table that wobbled, a backyard swing we hung crooked and never fixed, a minivan that coughed through vacations until we learned its rhythm. I kept adding, first mortgage, the night the power went out and we played cards by flashlight, the day she cried when the last child left for college. Those images sit in warm colors. The report pages beside them sit in black and white, numbers and dates that don't care who we were. I moved between the two piles like a man sanding rough boards. The goal isn't to erase the knots, just not let them cut you open. I squared the stacks, aligned the corners, breathed slow. A marriage saves you 1,000 times in small ways. How many cuts does it take to undo that work? Strategy is mercy in work clothes. I gathered the file and returned each family photo to its frame, the way you tuck children in after a long day. The plan wasn't fireworks, it was sunrise, sure, steady, impossible to rush. I would not shred a holiday to settle a score. I would let the season land, then place truth where it belongs, the center of the table, in a gold envelope, in the same hands that promised me a life. I checked the dining room light one last time, slid fresh batteries into the candles, and felt the envelope under my palm the way a key sits right when it finally turns. Quiet revenge isn't about hurt, it's about ending pretend. I stood in the doorway and watched the house glow like it used to, then flicked the switch and let the dark rest. Tomorrow would carry the weight I set tonight. When it does, do I speak first, or let the paper say every word for me? Post-Christmas evenings have their own glow. Coats on the banister, kids racing in sock feet, someone asking where the pie knife went. The fire caught on the first try, and the house smelled like butter and cedar, the way it has for years. My son wrestled a trash bag full of wrapping paper. My daughter fixed the crooked angel on the tree. Nora floated from stove to table with that practiced grace hosts learn over decades. I carved the roast the way my father taught me. Angle the knife, don't rush the first cut, and passed plates that kept coming back cleaner than they left. Between stories about first apartments and stubborn appliances, I kept count in my head. Which chair held which history? How many times laughter covered a wobble in the floor? I laid out dessert forks, straightened the stack of napkins, and eased the gold envelope up from the cookbook where it waited. Warm rooms make brave choices possible. That's why families build them. There's a second in a long night when the noise gives you a lane. It came after dessert, when the kids drifted toward board games and the older folks began to tell the same stories we pray they never forget. I stood, circled behind Nora's chair, and set the gold envelope where her hands could find it without hunting. No speech, no throat clearing. The paper sounded louder than the room, and for an instant the air thinned like a front rolling through. She glanced up, and I held her eyes the way you do when a child asks if the storm will pass. Then I stepped back, palms down on the chair I'd just vacated, feeling the grain of wood my grands will someday outgrow. I had promised myself I would not raise my voice or break the table we all share. The choice stood there between us, plain as day. Let the season finish the lie, or open the truth right now. She slit the envelope with one careful nail, the way she opens recipes she plans to keep. The first photo slid out, the elevator frame from the Belmore Grand, followed by the billing page and a neat stack of calls that did not belong to a life we built together. The room didn't gasp, it emptied. Sound stayed in the corners like it wasn't sure it could cross the floor. A grandson laughed at a joke in the den, then hushed when he saw faces he knows too well. Nora's jaw set, then wavered, then tried to set again. My mother-in-law shifted her cane. Someone adjusted a lampshade that hadn't moved all year. I kept my hands flat and my voice level because I've learned you don't steady a table by pounding it. The papers made their small, crisp music as they changed hands. The fire cracked once, honest as ever, and the tree lights flickered in a way that didn't ask permission. I leaned close enough for only us to hear. Why? The word weighed what it weighed, no more, no less. Nora's answer came thin, the way feet sound on new snow. It's not what you think. I nodded toward the stack. Then say what it is. Her throat worked. A dozen explanations crowded the space between us. Loneliness that hides in errands, attention that feels like a rescue, a season of life that tells you the mirror is your enemy. Around us, forks went down on plates, napkins waited for instructions, and a niece traced the rim of her glass like she was testing a note. I kept my seat and let time do its slow labor. Truth doesn't sprint. It climbs stairs and catches its breath at the landing. Nora lifted the hotel receipt as if the number might change while she held it. My son stood in the doorway, torn between habit and heat. I asked again, steady, "Tell me the truth." The last of the pages settled back into the envelope, heavier now that everyone knew its weight. A sister-in-law reached for Nora's shoulder. A cousin gathered the little ones and steered them toward the puzzle on the coffee table. I folded my napkin the way my mother taught me and set it beside a plate that would never mean the same thing again. The dog laid his head on my boot like he understood, and the house, our best work, waited for instructions. This is where men twice my size have shattered rooms, where calmer souls have swallowed whole winters to keep the picture straight. I thought about the vows said in a chapel with poor air conditioning, the babies we bounced through sleepless summers, the mortgage we muscled down 1 month at a time. I looked at Nora, at the edge she stood on, at the one I had walked to meet her. Do I draw the line tonight and let the papers speak, or carry this into morning and pay that price in full? Morning has a way of measuring what the night refused to solve. Nora sat at the kitchen table with eyes swollen from the kind of sleep that never lands. The house still smelled like cinnamon and pine, but the air felt thinner, like altitude. She wrapped both hands around a mug she didn't drink. I rinsed plates no one had touched, folded the tablecloth along its old crease, and let the sounds of an ordinary day earn back a little ground. The faucet, the clink of ceramic, the heater starting up. We moved carefully, the way folks do after a fall, checking for breaks we can't see. She looked smaller in my sweatshirt, a detail I stored without turning it into a speech. Outside, the trash truck hissed past, same as every Thursday, which felt like mercy. I kept my voice even, asked if she wanted toast, set the butter out anyway. Some repairs start with quiet hands doing simple tasks until the room remembers how. She asked for a pen and the good stationery, the kind we save for weddings and thank yous. I cleared a space at the end of the table and slid a legal pad beside the envelope she had closed but couldn't unlearn. The first line took her a long time to write. She held the pen like a stranger, lifted it, set it down, lifted it again. A clock on the wall tried to keep time for both of us. I poured coffee and watched steam rise, wishing a simple thing could carry a heavier job. She nodded once without looking up, and I understood. This wasn't about performance. It was about inventory. She would write what happened and where it led, not the story she wanted to tell, but the one that stood up. I rested a hand on the chair back and waited for the scratch of ink to find its rhythm. Do I sit with her while she wrestles, or leave her alone with the truth she called in? The letter built itself in plain words. She wrote about being listened to, how attention can feel like oxygen when routines grow tight. She described small messages that made long days shorter, the way quick check-ins can turn into late-night confidences, and late-night confidences into a room with no windows. She used the word shame more than once, and the paper took it without arguing. I remembered seasons when we were both running on fumes, kids' schedules, aging parents, bills that don't care how tired you are. I didn't notice when friendly became tender, or when tender became secret. She said the change arrived dressed like help. She wrote that stopping felt simple in the morning and impossible at midnight. The lines didn't beg, and they didn't bargain. They told a path, step by step, taken by 2 feet that should have come home. When she slid the page aside for the next, the pen moved easier, as if confession had learned its way across the grain. I called the kids, and by dusk we were in the living room that's held every kind of news a family can carry. The fire went low, coasters waited for cups no one wanted. Nora sat forward and read her letter out loud, voice steady until Vegas entered the sentence, then thinner as the dates and receipts lined up behind it. Our oldest daughter stared at a framed photo on the mantel and finally said, "It would have been easier to bury you than to hear this." The words fell hard and true, and no one tried to soften them. My son stood with his arms crossed, then uncrossed, then found a seat he never uses. A niece took the smallest children to the hallway to teach them a card trick, and their giggles came back like an echo from a time before tonight. When the last page ended, the letter sat between us like a tool we were afraid to touch, useful and dangerous in the same shape. The house settled the way old houses do after weather. Quiet, a pop in the ductwork, the long exhale of heat through the vent. I stacked the pages neatly and placed them by the envelope, not as a threat, but as a record that wouldn't move itself. Words had done their work. There was no more to add. I walked the mugs to the sink, rinsed them under warm water, and watched the foam lift gray and then clear. Nora moved to the guest room with a blanket over her shoulders, footsteps no louder than a thought. The kids spoke in low voices by the door, choosing rides and boundaries and what tomorrow would need from each of us. I stood in the entryway where we've taken first day of school photos and Sunday church pictures and let the weight find the floorboards instead of my chest. The papers are ready. The season is nearly over. Do I file in the morning and spare no one, or wait one more day and spend what little piece is left? 3 days after the envelope, the house felt like a stage after the audience leaves. Warm lights, empty rows, the faint smell of something finished. That morning, our youngest called with a voice that made my keys jump in my hand. I drove to her place and found Nora small on the sofa, eyes unfocused, asking if I'd survived a crash we never had. The nurse line told us what we already knew. This wasn't a sit and see. St. Helena Medical Center took her in quiet and efficient, the way hospitals do when the emergency isn't loud. I signed forms with the same hand that once signed for our first mortgage. The fluorescent hall buzzed steady. A tech asked for next of kin. The word landed like a brick I carried without complaint. I stood at the window while they drew blood and took vitals and felt something I hadn't felt since our first colicky night as parents, useful and useless at the same time. By afternoon, a doctor gave us the kind of language that keeps a person upright. Dehydration, exhaustion, a possible break in how the mind holds the present. He didn't dramatize, and I was grateful. He talked fluids, rest, observation. He mentioned grief that can bend a person's sense of real. I thanked him because manners are rails when roads curve. In the chair beside Nora's bed, I watched the monitors make their clean lines and remembered road trips where she read maps while I drove. How simple it felt to be a team with one job: get home. She opened her eyes once and asked if Christmas already happened. I said yes and squeezed her hand, and she drifted. I walked the hallway past family photos no one in the building knows and focused on the hum of machines doing their honest work. If care can steady a body this way, what steadies a marriage after the truth has cut it open? Graham met me in the cafeteria where coffee tastes like decisions. He didn't reach for legal language first, he reached for a chair. "Don't let hatred write your next chapter," he said, simple as a fence post. We talked logistics, time off, mail forwarding, documents that need clean lines and clean dates. He reminded me to keep my voice even with everyone who isn't at fault: front desk staff, neighbors, our kids. Then he shifted to the part a courthouse can't fix: how to leave room for dignity without making room for denial. He said a man can be strong without being loud, and a boundary can be firm without being cruel. I thought about the letter, the envelope, the kitchen, the vows that still exist even when they stand at the edge of their job. Before he left, he circled 3 words on a napkin: truth, safety, process. I folded it and put it in my wallet like a license. The next day, I sat at my desk and opened a folder that smelled like paper and resolve. I called the state medical board, and for the first time told the story without the parts that begged for sympathy: dates, times, exhibits. I provided what I had and stayed in the lane Graham drew: concise, factual, respectful of the process that protects patients and the people who work on them. The investigator on the other end thanked me for being clear and explained what comes next: intake, review, request for additional documentation if needed. No promises, no drama, just steps. I hung up and felt the house exhale. A man's impulse is to find a target and swing. I chose to file, not fight. Then I walked the place we built. Photos straightened, dead bulb replaced, a loose hinge tightened, because a home shouldn't sag while you're fixing other structures. In some rooms, justice is a hammer. In others, it's a form you fill without shaking. When St. Helena cleared her for discharge, the psychiatrist recommended quiet, routine, simple light. I arranged the white cottage my company keeps near the edge of town: clean sheets, stocked pantry, a neighbor who knows how to mind his business. I moved in a chair she loves, left a basket of plain things: tea, crackers, a sweater that's more memory than thread. The house we shared stayed closed to her, not as punishment, but as triage. I walked through our rooms one last time before driving over, touching the mantel, the groove in the banister our kids wore down, the window that catches morning like a blessing. At the cottage door, I set the keys in her palm and told her there would be groceries on Thursdays and that I'd call before I came by. She nodded, tired and small, and stepped inside. The wind rattled the oak leaves, winter stiff and honest. Do I lock my own front door behind me tonight? And what else do I have to lock to keep us all whole? The Monday after everything, I went back to work because muscle memory can carry a man when his heart won't. Emails, invoices, a hinge that squeaked on the back door of the shop, small tasks that ask for steady hands, not speeches. At lunch, I ate in the truck with the window cracked, cold air keeping me honest. By evening, I was home on the front steps, listening to the dark settle in the pines. The porch boards hold a history of shoe soles: kids running, neighbors dropping by, me pacing during colic nights and college decisions. I let the quiet list our wins without trying to argue for more. A barred owl called from the far tree line. The dog gave a half-hearted answer and curled tighter. I thought about the word survivor and how it fits awkward at first, like a jacket someone else broke in. If survival is just breath and bills paid, what turns it into living again? Sunday came, and I took my usual spot because a bench doesn't stop being yours when life swerves. I didn't close my eyes when the choir swelled. I kept them open and watched sunlight move across hymnals like a slow answer. The pastor preached on wandering and return. Folks nodded at the right places, and I kept my mouth shut because talking would have been for me, not for God. A deacon squeezed my shoulder on the way back from communion, the kind of touch that says, "We see you," without making a show. The organ hummed, kids fidgeted, and somewhere behind me a baby made that soft pre-cry sound that always warns of a storm or a nap. I listened, not for a miracle, but for something smaller, space between words, a place to set my next step. If you keep the pew and lose the promise, do you rebuild here in the open or learn to pray out on the porch? On Thursday, I walked into a small office that smelled like cedar and old books, and I sat in a chair that didn't pretend I was fine. The therapist was a quiet man with a ballpoint and patience. He didn't circle names, he circled moments. "Teach me the timeline," he said, which felt safer than, "Tell me your pain." We spoke in plain pieces, the photo, the envelope, the hospital, the cottage. He gave me a sentence to keep. "Healing isn't forgetting, it's remembering without bleeding." I tried it on like a new hat and found it didn't pinch. We talked about anger like it was weather, not identity. Boundaries like fences you maintain so animals stay alive, not punished. Before I left, he asked what I wanted from next Thursday. I said a place to put the sharp edges so the grandkids don't find them by accident. He nodded like that was work a man could learn to do. 2 letters came from the cottage, both in Nora's careful hand. The envelopes were thin, the kind that used to carry birthday money and now carry something heavier. She wrote about mornings when the kettle sounds like a judge, afternoons that stretch, nights that press. She said she was sorry and that she hated what she'd become, and I believed both lines because they were simple. I set the letters in the second drawer of my desk, the one with warranties and the spare keys, a place for things you hope you don't need. I read each once, then closed the drawer and let the latch click. The house felt still after that, like it was waiting to see if I'd go looking for more. I made a sandwich, cleaned the knife, wiped the counter twice. Grief has chores if you let it. If a letter can say everything and fix nothing, what do I do with what's left in my hands? On Saturday, my grandson brought over a new-to-him 22 his uncle passed down, and we set up on the tailgate like 100 quiet lessons before it. We started with the basics: safety on, barrel down, eyes clear, finger off the trigger, then moved to oiling the bolt and feeling for grit. He wanted to rush, because that's what young legs do, and I put a palm on his shoulder and told him every tool respects patience. We practiced breathing, the kind that smooths a sight picture without forcing it. He hit the paper once, then twice, and grinned that grin that lives between pride and surprise. I didn't talk about Nora or Vegas or courts. I let the work teach what I needed to learn again: discipline, control, follow through. When we packed up, he asked if we could do this every month. I said yes, because repetition builds what storms try to tear. If I can pass him steadiness, can I keep enough for myself? After service, the hallway filled with coats and coffee breath, the way it does when folks are trying to be kind. A couple from the next pew asked if I was doing okay, stretching the words like taffy to cover what they really meant. Another friend offered casserole and a story about a cousin who went through something similar, as if pain is a club with dues. I kept my answers simple: weather, the game on Friday, a remark about the choir nailing the descant. People mean well. Curiosity just borrows their mouth sometimes. I shook hands longer than I needed to, held doors, and let others go first at the ramp, because manners let a man keep his footing when the floor tilts. The pastor's wife squeezed my elbow and said, "We're praying." That landed right. Driving home, I rolled the window down to let the cold do its work. Comfort and questions share a hallway. Today, I chose the door with fewer words. Near dusk, I took the long route, the one that passes the white cottage at the edge of town. From the road, you can see the desk by the window and the lamp that throws a warm circle over paper. Nora sat there, back slightly hunched, pen moving, stopping, moving again. It looked like a life being sorted with no applause. I eased my foot off the gas and let the truck idle forward. A neighbor walked his dog under the oaks and didn't look up. I could have turned in. I could have brought tea, asked about her day, stood in that circle of light like a man who still belonged. Instead, I watched from the dark shoulder until the temptation passed and the road asked me to choose. Mercy is real. So are boundaries. From this distance, both felt like work I have to do every single time. If I cross that gravel tonight, do I help her heal or set both of us back? At home, the small rituals kept their shape even as their meaning shifted. I hung my jacket on the same hook, only now it felt like a museum piece. The dog thumped his tail twice, then settled like a guard who understands the night shift. I set the coffee for morning and checked the latch on the back door, the way I have since my hands were younger. I found the old deck of cards we used when the power went out, and the memory arrived whole. Lantern on the table, kids arguing about rules, Nora laughing at the ace that always shows up late. I shuffled and dealt to no one and let the quiet answer. Some habits keep you from floating away. Some remind you what went overboard. I put the cards back and stood in the kitchen long enough to hear the heater catch. The house held, the way houses do when you ask them to. What am I holding that won't hold me back? I sat on the back steps with a blanket and a question I couldn't outwalk. Can love come back in a different uniform and still be love? The stars weren't helpful, but the air was honest. I thought about the first apartment, the burn mark on a thrift store table we covered with a placemat for 20 years. I thought about the 3 times we almost split and the 4 times we didn't because someone made soup and someone else fixed the sink. A life is a ledger of small mercies that rarely cash out all at once. The therapist's line came back, remember without bleeding, and I tried to picture what that looks like when you're buying dog food and cutting grass. I'm not in a hurry to put a new name on what's left. I'm also not eager to live like a museum guide. For now, I'll mow straight lines and pay the bills on time. Will that be enough to count as living? On the fridge, I taped a note that only I need to read. Truth first, then kindness, then distance if needed. It isn't poetry, but a man doesn't need rhyme to head in the right direction. I sorted the week. Therapy Thursday, groceries on Tuesday, call the bank about the joint account on Friday. In the glove box, I tucked the napkin where Graham wrote 3 words. Truth, safety, process. I'm not a judge, and I'm not a saint. I'm a person who has to wake up tomorrow with whatever I pick tonight. The phone buzzed with a text from a friend asking about fishing in spring, and for the first time in weeks, I could answer without pretending. Before bed, I stood in the doorway and let the room be exactly what it is, unfinished, still usable, waiting on a careful hand. If you were me, would you choose to forgive or to stand with the truth and let time do the rest? FT, the letter from the state medical board arrived plain as a utility bill. Intake confirmed, review underway, next contact pending, no headlines, no judgment, steps. I sat at the kitchen table and read it twice, grateful for the kind of language that keeps the floor level. I called the case number they listed, verified what they needed, and wrote the dates on a sticky note I'd see every morning by the coffee maker. This wasn't about punishing to feel better. It was about handing the right facts to the people whose job is to weigh them. I set the envelope beside the fire safe with our wills and the house deed, those quiet papers that carry big jobs. The dog shifted at my feet. Outside, a neighbor's mailbox clicked shut, the small sounds of normal life. I breathed with them. The season was moving on without asking me, which felt like mercy. When systems work, you don't feel them shaking, you feel them hold. I pulled the binder from the shelf and started a clean timeline, the kind even a stranger could read. Left column, dates and times. Middle, what happened and where. Right column, where the proof lives. File names, page numbers, photo labels. No color codes, no flourishes. I printed a table of contents and slid it under the cover like a book that knows where it's going. Then I spoke to the camera the way a neighbor would on a front porch. Keep copies of your bills, download statements, take photos of receipts, label everything the day you get it. Save messages legally. Don't snoop where you're not allowed. When you talk, write it down. Who, when, about what. Because your memory will tell the story it wants to hear when you're tired. And if you need help, hire it early and stay in your lane. I closed the binder and laid my hand on the spine. When the next storm finds you, will your house have a map? I wrote 3 words on a card and taped it inside the cover. Evidence, calm, timing. Evidence means what a judge could touch. Records, receipts, logs, not feelings that flare at midnight. Calm is a practice, not a mood. Drink water, slow the breath, speak in short sentences, sleep before you reply. Timing is the difference between a mess and a plan. Don't rush the fuse, don't stall the truth. I carried that card like a pocket prayer through errands and appointments. At the hardware store, I picked up screws for a sagging hinge and realized the metaphor was too obvious to say out loud. Hinges fail in silence. Doors still look like doors until they don't. Back home, I fixed the hinge first, then folded laundry, then sat with the case file for exactly 15 minutes. No more, no less. The point wasn't to live in the paperwork. It was to live beside it without letting it name the whole house. When the week started to crowd me, I drove to Pine Ridge and let the gravel straighten my thoughts. The cabin still smelled like cedar and rain. I built a small fire and listened to the pop you feel in your chest more than your ears. Out here, a man remembers he's part of bigger math, wind, wood, coals settling into something useful. I boiled coffee in the old tin pot, the one that always tastes like camp, then sat on the step and watched a hawk float above the clearing. I thought about the road that brought me here, a photo, an envelope, a hospital hallway, a cottage with a yellow lamp. The fire burned to a bright center, quiet as truth when it doesn't need help. I raked the coals, covered them clean, and packed out what I brought in. On the way home, the radio filled the truck with a song from years back, and for once it didn't sting. It just sang. That night I dialed the family group and told them what they needed to hear. I'm okay, I'm steady, I'm not angry, and I'm not going back. The words surprised me with how right they fit. Not tight, not loose. True. We talked logistics, drop-offs, birthdays, who's bringing rolls to Sunday dinner, and then the quiet arrived that means a decision has landed. After we hung up, I stood in the kitchen and let the house answer me back. The clock's clean tick, the heater's hush, the faint rattle of a window I've been meaning to fix. I wrote one more note for myself and stuck it to the fridge under a photo of the grandkids in Halloween costumes. Build forward. It isn't a slogan. It's a plan you can carry to the sink and the bank and the back porch. Tomorrow I'll file what needs filing and oil what needs oiling. Tonight I'll keep the light low and the doors locked. If I hold this line, what future opens? Top drawer, second handle, the place where warranties live and hard truths rest. I slid it open and found Nora's letters stacked exactly where I left them, ink pressed into paper that carries more weight than it looks. I read each once when they came. Today I let my eyes sit on the envelopes and nowhere else. Some things don't need reopening to be honored. I set the drawer key on the desk, lined up the pens, and straightened a photo of the kids at the beach, sunburned and loud, long before any of this. The house made its small, honest noises, a heater catching, a branch tapping the eave, the dog sighing at a dream only he understands. I brewed coffee, poured half, and let the rest steam away like a reminder that not everything must be finished to be enough. The letters will stay where they are, kept, not consulted. That's a boundary a man can carry without explaining it to anyone. Quiet revenge isn't fireworks, it's alignment. It means I don't let pain turn me into someone my grandkids won't recognize. It means I file forms cleanly, speak plainly, and refuse the theater of being the loudest one in the room. It's fixing the hinge that sags instead of slamming the door it holds. It's letting the truth keep working while I keep working too. Oil the mower, pay the bill, show up when I promised. I return grace where I can and withhold access where I must. More than anything, it's not letting the worst chapter audition to be the whole book. So I keep my schedule simple. Therapy on Thursdays, groceries on Tuesdays, paperwork in a labeled bin, prayers said with my eyes open. Tomorrow I'll mail the last document, slide her spare key across a counter, and step back into air that belongs to me. Do I turn and say a clean goodbye on that porch, or leave it at the locksmith and drive on? Morning starts with a list written in block letters. Coffee, dog, bank, fence, dinner. I shave the way I always have, slow, careful around the scar I got fixing a roof years ago, and set the radio to something that knows when to stay quiet. At the bank, I sign where I'm told, steady as a man paying for lumber. Back home, I replace a warped picket and wipe the dirt off my hands before I touch the doorknob. a habit my father drilled into me when work and home met at the threshold. The afternoon goes to small mercies: a call with my son about a leaky sink, a text with a photo of a science project, a walk that takes the dog past the mailbox and back. Supper is simple: eggs, toast, a sliced tomato, and the dishes dry on a towel that's seen better summers. I turn off lights room by room and let the house settle. No pretending, no polishing, just a day that holds. Survival kept the lights on. Healing asked me to stand in the dark and say what's true. I won't dress this up. Peace broke. I picked up what mattered: evidence over anger, boundaries over noise, work done in daylight. I let the house learn a new rhythm without lying about the old one. I chose truth even when it cost skin. I chose a quiet kind of revenge, the kind that files the form, fixes the hinge, and refuses to let the worst minute run the rest of my life. If any of this steadies you, take it. If you've walked farther, leave a marker for the next man so he doesn't think he's crossing this alone. Drop a 1 if you've heard peace break, a 0 if you still hold it tight, F if you lean toward forgiveness, T if you stand with truth and let time work. Subscribe so this story finds the one who needs it next. I'm still here. I'm choosing truth. And tomorrow, I'll choose it again.